Okay. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. We have been working our way through a book by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. And but you don't need to have read the chapters that I'm working out of, because the talk kind of stands alone as well. But I'm curious, how many people have been reading the book? Anybody? It's quite a few. Good. Huh? Long time ago. Okay, so we're working on the chapters tonight called The Hard Way and The Open Way. Needless to say, he named those chapters. Really what this is talking about, this is the Buddhist path, and how one progresses along it. And in this regard, it's safe to say that this book was written and these talks given in an uncompromising manner. And by that I mean that he stressed the importance of having a living teacher in order to be able to progress along the path and actually experience the path effectively and with any degree of rapidity. The reason one needs a living teacher is because our inclination toward self-deception and egotism is so powerful. It's what brought us here. That very inclination is also the source of suffering, but we are immured in it, and it's very difficult to extract oneself, if not impossible. The number of people who have ever done that alone are very, very, very few. Self-enlightened Buddhas, you might say. And in fact, all of Buddhism is about lineage. Lineage means the passing of the experience and the understanding and the wisdom from one human being to another. And the analogy that I've come across recently that I like is of the teacher has a lighted candle and the student has an unlit candle, and the teacher reaches over and lights the student's candle. And then the student then turns around and lights another person's candle. And in this way, the light, if you want to take that as a metaphor for understanding, is passed from one person to another. And this is what's happened for 2,500 years, or 2,600 years at this point, at least, as the torch or the flame has been passed from one person to the next, starting with the Buddha. And perhaps in some accountings, even before the Buddha, that he's not actually the first person in the lineage, but in terms of Buddhism he is. But he himself received help from others. Because it's very difficult to extract oneself from this. There are a number of people in the lineage who have done that. But you can count them on one hand out of the millions of people who have tread the path and the many who have actually achieved understanding and enlightenment. They did it with the help of a teacher, because our proclivity for self-deception is so powerful. What the hard way is about, that chapter, is about it's one aspect of the student's relationship with the teacher. And what it has to do with is the opening and the deep communication and friendship that takes place between a teacher and a student when the two are geared for it and ready. It takes two. And what it is an opening and a sharing of minds. There are many, or at least a number of expressions to describe this. They talk about the meeting of the two minds, the meeting of the mind of teacher and student. And what that really means is that the teacher, I mean, you've experienced it when you met someone who's very open and non-judgmental and non-critical, and and accepting and appreciative of you. And that has encouraged you to relax and to open to them. That is really partly what happens between the teacher and the student. The teacher presents this possibility of openness to the student, and this encourages the student to open and share his or her mind with the teacher in a way that is genuine and not posing and posturing and not defensive and self-protective to a degree. And that then allows the teacher to open a bit further. And then if the student is receptive and appreciative, they can open again, even further. And this is like a dance. It's described as being a dance, or lovemaking, or diplomacy, that the teacher opens a bit and that encourages the student to open and back and forth. Now, inevitably, there are times, though, when the student comes to the teacher and they aren't open at all. And in fact, they feel I am who I am kind of presentation. And I want to be appreciated as being me. And this can provoke the teacher because this is kind of the student's ego speaking, the student's self-conception of being a separate, describable person who needs to be appreciated or respected or treated in a certain way. And this might provoke the teacher to do who knows what. But it can be very painful for the student, especially once the relationship has been established, this relationship of deep friendship, you might say, of deep openness. Because when that happens, that deep friendship or deep openness between the teacher and the student recognizes it as being, at the very least, unusual, and perhaps even extraordinary. A moment of complete openness and awareness and communication that can happen. And oftentimes this creates in the student a moment of evaluation, like, wow, something extraordinary just happened between me and this other person. I saw something. And in that moment of evaluation, everything closes down, because that's ego looking back at a moment of, you might say, absence of ego. By ego, I mean self-consciousness, self-awareness. That voice inside that says, me, I, that self-aggrandizing, that looks to the future for a better way to be, looks to the past and is either proud of one's accomplishments or sorrowful for one's sufferings. And that voice of ego can look at that experience of openness with the teacher and judge it, value it, and try to possess it. And then in that moment, of course, it's gone, because that's the very antithesis of openness, that judgment, that valuation. And the person, the individual, feels loss, wants to get it back. And that desire to get it back itself makes it impossible to get it back, because it's a self-aggrandizement, and that openness is the very opposite of self-aggrandizement. And what keeps the person from opening again and from being here in the present moment, that experience they had with the teacher, is the desire to have something extraordinary or spectacular happen. It's the rejection of this experience as it arises right now in the present moment. So what's necessary, you see, is for the student to begin to realize that the essence of the experience that they had with the teacher is to appreciate this life as it arises and passes away right now, in this very moment, for no reason at all. Now, there are many things that keep us from doing that. A lot of bad habits from the past, things that we have acquired, values and projections and thoughts about who I am and who I was and who I will be. And what the teacher demands of the student is that they surrender those self-conceptions. And it can be quite painful, because we really don't want to. The voice of ego, the voice that says, I am who I am, and I am going to protect myself and have a good life and minimize my pain and try to maximize my happiness, that voice is very hard to give up. It's always rooted in the past and in the future. It's always sort of an extra comment on what is going on right now. And in the teacher-student relationship, the teacher is constantly demanding that the student give that up. And to the extent that the student refuses and clings to it and still wants to have a relationship with this other individual, it can become quite painful. So what's required is that the student really open and give to the situation. Might be with the teacher, it could be just to life in general, without expectation of getting anything in return. As long as there's that expectation of getting something in return, it screws everything up. It makes us into sort of a calculating, self-aggrandizing individual. And this really is the process of dismantling the basic structure of ego. Ego is always about self-aggrandizement, self-protection, in one form or another. It's that voice that says me, 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 I. And it can be quite painful to see that and to give it up. And we might try all kinds of things to tread this so-called spiritual path. We might try going into retreat. I'm talking about things that we do in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. You go into retreat, and that can be quite heroic. You could do, if you really got into it, and I know people who have, the classic long retreat. The long retreat is a retreat in solitary, more or less, for 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. You could even do the Bardo retreat. Talk about heroic. The Bardo retreat is 49 days, because that's the amount of time that we supposedly spend in the Bardo. And you do it in complete darkness. You enter a special structure that has a hole in the roof and has a little trap kind of door. And you enter it during daytime, and as night falls, the hole in the roof is covered. So now you're in total darkness. And food is passed into you through this trap. You know, they open an outside door, put the food in, close it, you open the inside door, take it out. That's the 49-day Bardo retreat. Boy, that's a toughie. I know people who failed at that retreat. Including some really terrific practitioners. It's just a hard one. And you could become quite heroic. You could practice all kinds of... I have a fellow student who, the only person I know who can do this, I go to teaching sometimes and they can last all day. You sit all day, more or less. And this person sits there in full lotus posture for the whole day. The only human being I know who can do that. And it's quite heroic, and you might endure terrific pain. And none of that has any benefit. It just serves to sort of buttress oneself, one's sense of self, one's sense of heroism. And in that chapter, Trungpa Rinpoche says that kind of heroism, you might go on a special diet, if you've been a meat eater, you might turn vegetarian. You might give up sex, perform all kinds of austerities, who knows what. And this is the false hard way, this way of heroism. Because the real hard way is simply, again and again, to be just who we are in the present moment, to give up our demands for self-recognition, to give up our demands for approval and love from others, and to simply be whatever is required of us in the present moment, especially with the teacher. So this is the hard way. The open way develops out of that, because you see, we begin to appreciate the ability to come open into the present moment. Really, it's the practice that we just did, the kind of meditation practice, vipassana practice, which means awareness or insight practice. The ability to come present into this moment in right now, space, full of sights and sounds and colors, again and again. We find ourselves thinking, we're having a thought, and we just can come present. We can let the thought go and come back into this present moment. It's really a matter of switching our loyalty from the thoughts and schemes that inhabit our minds and that drive us forward, away from the past in sort of in a forward lean into the future, and giving our loyalty to this. So it's not just a matter when you meditate of, you realize that you've been thinking and say, oh, I'm a bad person, I've been thinking. I'm coming back to awareness. That's just a beginning. Really, it's a matter of learning to appreciate this presence, the present moment, and everything that arises in it. Beginning to become a citizen of this world. They have lots of pictures, for instance, of enlightened people symbolically juggling the sun and moon. And what that refers to is that when a person begins to come present and to appreciate this life as it unfolds in this present moment, they become playful. They can play with all the things that are arising and passing around, around and through us. I'm going to read some quotes from this chapter. He says, having discovered self-deception meaning this self-aggrandizement, egohood, we suffer tremendous paranoia and self-criticism in front of the teacher. The teacher becomes, when you have a relationship with someone who has seen you and shown you what openness is, then when you get closed down, when you walk in with your schemes, you feel as though you're being x-rayed, that there's no place to hide. It's very embarrassing. And I can see some nods here from people who've experienced that. It is good to experience the hopelessness of ambition, of trying to be open, of trying to cheer ourselves up, because this prepares the ground for another type of attitude towards spirituality. The whole point we are trying to get to is, when are we going to open really? And by open, what he means and what I think we mean here is begin to really accept this present moment, this world as it arises and passes away right now, really, instead of exercising our schemes and our self-protective mechanisms and our depressions and our complaints about the past. he tells the story of Naropa, a famous saint in the 11th century, who had achieved a lot in this life. You might say he's become a big mucky muck. He had been the abbot of the most famous of all the Buddhist universities at the time, Nalanda, and he was one of 4 abbots. There were 4, and he was the abbot of one of the gates, they called it, which is an enormous achievement. But he didn't really have understanding. He hadn't achieved enlightenment itself. And the story goes that one day he was sitting reading his books on the teachings, and an ugly old hag appeared to him bearing the 37 marks of ugliness, as they say in the texts. And she was actually, she was actually the Vajrayogini, who is a yidam. And Vajrayogini is depicted in many ways, but when she appears to the unenlightened, she can appear as a frightening hag bearing 37 marks of ugliness. Now, when she appears to people who have devotion and have some understanding, she appears as a beautiful 16-year-old girl, and she symbolizes transcendent knowledge, prajna. And when she appears as this beautiful 16-year-old girl, she's also fearsome. She's semi-wrathful. She has fangs. Her hair is in flames. She's bright red in color, and she's quite beautiful. And she has 3 eyes, and she wears all kinds of symbolic accoutrements that symbolize different things. She wears, for instance, a necklace of 52 skulls, fresh skulls, and these symbolize the 52 thoughts, that 52 kinds of thoughts that we have, confused thoughts. And she wears a tiara of 5 dried skulls, and these symbolize the 5 defilements of passion, aggression, envy, stupidity, and greed, and all kinds of other things. She has all these things that she carries, and her fangs and her eyes. So she appears to Naropa in the guise of this ugly old hag, and she says to him, "Do you understand the words, or do you understand their meaning?" And he says, "Oh, I only understand the words. I don't really understand what they mean." And she's quite happy because she knows that this is true. And then he's seeking to please her more, and he says, "I understand their meaning too." And she gets furious and scares the bejesus out of him. And he says, "Well, what should I do?" And she says, "You have to go find my brother." And this is a symbolic brother. And the brother is Tilopa, a great siddha at the time, great enlightened person. And so Naropa, to his credit, gives up his position at Nalanda and sets off on a journey to find Tilopa. And he goes through terrible trials trying to find Tilopa. And really, he doesn't find Tilopa until he begins to become genuine, to become who he truly is, to drop his masks and become the genuine person, the seeker that he is. And then he finds the Guru. And even then, he has to go through terrible trials that take 12 years, and they are truly difficult and painful. And he goes through these trials one after the next. I mean, they're walking along. See, Tilopa is a siddha. And a siddha, he's a mahasiddha, a great power holder. And this is a particular style of enlightened teacher. And the style is fierce, truly fierce. That doesn't mean that you have to have an enlightened, a mahasiddha for a teacher, but Naropa had one. And as they walk along, Tilopa might say to Naropa, "If I had a student, he would go steal some food from that wedding party over there for me." And so Naropa, goes over and tries to steal the food, and he gets caught and beaten half to death, until finally Tilopa comes along and says, "Oh, what's the matter with you?" And Naropa says, "Oh, this unenlightened person who believes he is identified with a body is in terrible pain." And Tilopa snaps his fingers and says, "Get up." And they walk along, and then there's another. It goes on like that for one incident for 12 of these incidents. He says, if I had a student, he'd throw himself off this cliff for me. And Naropa throws himself off the cliff and is lying at the bottom with his bones broken, similar thing. And it goes on and on like that until finally, one day, Tilopa looks at Naropa, takes off his sandal, and slaps him in the face with his sandal. And at that moment, Naropa has complete openness, complete awareness, complete vision and seeing, and he achieves enlightenment. And that is the end of his path, or the beginning of a different stage of his path with Tilopa. And what this is saying is that it's necessary for us, we have to give up something on this path. What we have to give up is our pride, our egotism, our sense of self, our sense of I am who I am, and I need to be respected and taken care of and treated well, because nobody owes us anything. And really what it's amounted to is all of that sense of selfhood that attaches to this I, this me who we carry around like a big sack of woe, of me and my past, me and my future. That's what has to be given up. And the teacher demands that of us. When that begins to happen, the student begins to step into this space of openness and genuineness in the present moment. And this is the beginning of the entrance into what's called the open way, or more literally, the great path, the great vehicle, the mahayana. See, this path, the Buddhist path, especially the Tibetan Buddhist path, is divided into three main stages. The first stage is the preparatory stage. It's the stage in which we begin to learn how to give up ego, which is a tremendous accomplishment and a tremendous benefit to us, because ego is really the source of suffering, this sense of I. With ego, when our belief in ego is our belief that all the things that we tell ourselves about our past and our future are true. And when we give that up, we are switching our allegiance from all those stories to the present moment, to this, which arises right now as being real. That's what the first stage of the path is about. It's called the foundational vehicle, the Hinayana, which literally means lesser vehicle, but Trungpa Rinpoche preferred to translate that as foundational vehicle, because it's the foundation for everything that comes after. The second stage of this path is called the greater vehicle, the mahayana. Yana means vehicle, like cart. And the entrance into that is the discovery of egolessness, that the ego is a myth, a lie, a fiction, this sense of I that we've been telling ourselves, that it actually isn't true. Not only is it not true, it's pernicious. It's the source of suffering and the source of error, mistakes, crime, sin, if you want to call it sin. I mean, really, it's the source of self-doubt. That's what ego is all about. Ego is fundamental self-doubt and the constant attempt to buttress ourselves because we fundamentally doubt ourselves. And the giving up of that and the coming into the present moment, it's so simple. We were doing it right now in this meditation. We just let go of the thoughts and we come present. But there's a shift in loyalty that has to take place, and that's more profound. And when we begin to give our loyalty to this life as it arises in the present moment, we give up all that reference point of I and other, of our past and our future, which could be quite scary, and at the same time, quite beautiful and quite liberating. And this is what's meant by the open way, that we begin to come present, come into this open moment in the present moment. He says some things about this. He says, what is wrong, what keeps us from doing it, is that you are making a big deal of yourself and your psychology. We make such big deals of ourselves. I'm depressed. I'm a big deal. And then he starts to talk about this. And this is really quite extraordinary, I think. That what this amounts to, this ability to come present and to shift our loyalty, is that we are beginning to develop true compassion. Compassion for ourselves and the ability to actually have compassion for others. He talks about this compassion as being fundamental clarity and warmth. We can experience it every time we come back into the present moment and rest our minds here. It's effortless. We just come back. We can all do it right now, every second. You come back and it's clear, it's open, it's full of vividness, and that very vividness, that color, the black of this shirt, the sound of this voice, the feeling of your arms on your knees, all of those things are full of heat, warmth, color, vividness, and clarity. And that is the stuff of compassion. It's that we could actually like this present moment. We could be drawn to it. It's like we're feeling attracted to it. There's a quality of almost being seduced by it. He says, compassion is not feeling sorry for someone. It is basic warmth. As much space and clarity as there is that much warmth as well. Some delightful feeling of positive things happening in yourself constantly. The positive things are all this stuff that's arising now. Meditation is delightful. Meditation meaning just coming back to awareness. And spontaneous. It is the continual act of making friends with yourself. And you extend that friendship to the outside world. I mean, isn't that extraordinary? That what friendship really means is the ability to come back and rest in this present moment and to be here for it and to be here for everything that's arising and participating in it with warmth and clarity and precision and genuineness and responsiveness. It's warmth and it's compassion for ourselves because we're giving up all that suffering of egohood, and it's compassion for everything else because we're participating in it, responding to it. It's not a matter of feeling sorry for. It's a matter of being there for. He says, compassion has nothing to do with achievement at all. It is spacious and very generous. When a person develops real compassion, she is uncertain whether she is being generous to others or to herself, because compassion is environmental generosity, without direction, without for me and without for them. It is filled with joy, spontaneously existing joy, constant joy in the sense of trust, in the sense that joy contains tremendous wealth and richness. I mean, that's extraordinary. That's so beautiful, that this joy, that this present moment is pervaded with this joy of being here, of being participating in it. He says that is why the second dhyana, the mahayana, is called the mahayana, the greater vehicle. It is the attitude that one has been born fundamentally rich rather than that one must become rich. Without this kind of confidence, meditation cannot be transferred into action at all. That one is born fundamentally rich. You don't become it, you just come back to it. Compassion automatically invites you to relate to people because you no longer regard people as a drain on your energy. They recharge your energy because in the process of relating with them, you acknowledge your wealth, your richness. And then he talks about how this is the key to the open way, the mahayana, this kind of openness and compassion. The bodhisattva path starts with this generosity and openness. You see, the entrance into the bodhisattva path, it's schematized the path into 10 stages. And each stage, these are called levels or grounds. The word in Sanskrit is bhumi. And each one has a virtue. And the virtue of the very first stage, which is the entrance into this path, is generosity. This openness, this willingness to participate, to be here for, to give without thought of giving. There's no giver and no receiver. It's just open participation, which is the ultimate way to give. There's no self-consciousness about it, no sense of virtue. It's completely natural. He calls it the surrendering process. You're surrendering to this world. Openness is not a matter of giving something to someone else, but it means giving up your demand and the basic criteria of the demand. This is the dana paramita, which is the generosity, the virtue of generosity of the first stage. The paramita means transcendent virtue. It's transcendent because it's not a matter of I doing something for someone else. It's part of the field. It's like we're just coming back to it. It's already here. It is learning to trust in the fact that you do not need to secure your ground, learning to trust in your fundamental richness, that you can afford to be open in the present moment. This is the open way. And this leads into the next paramitas. There are 6 primary ones, and then there are 4 that are usually not talked about, but the next one is called Shila, which is discipline. And the discipline here is giving up ego, giving up thoughts of I and other, giving up that sense of me, which is utterly unnecessary. Every time you come present, fully present, in the present moment, there is no I. It evaporates. And then when it comes back, you lose track of the present moment, right? Every time you think of I, what did I have for lunch? What am I going to do tomorrow? And we're not here anymore. And then we come back. We remember, we come back into the present. And the I, that's I and all the stories about it, just evaporate like mist in the morning sun. Just like that. And the sun is this sun of the present moment. It melts away all that mist of I. So the second virtue is discipline, which is giving up I, and it goes on from there. I'm not going to go through these because it's going on too long. But he goes through the 6 paramitas. They're classic. The next one is patience. It's like, having given up I and begun to understand that we're already here, you become completely patient in a natural way without exercising patience, because patience is just a matter of being present and enjoying it. Completely here. And beyond patience, there's energy. I am doing the 6 paramitas. And energy is that being here in the present moment, you're inspired to relate to everybody around you. It becomes joyful, which is what virya is. Virya is energy, joy. And doing that, we begin to understand this terrific openness of this present moment, that it's an open dimension full of possibilities and opportunities, which is dhyana, and which is literally the translation for that is meditation. But what it means is this open mind of meditation. And then beyond that is the ultimate clarity, that we're giving up those egotistical thoughts which are constantly judging everything around us. That's good, that's bad. This person's attractive, that person's unattractive. This person has done something to me, that person has done something for me. We give all that up because that's just thoughts, just schemes. You can burn it up in awareness. And that is prajna, the last of the 6 paramitas. Complete clarity of mind, which sees the world as it is, stripped of our judgments and our hopes and fears. He says, so the main theme is giving up ego. We must begin to abandon the basic struggle of ego, to be completely open, to to have that kind of absolute trust in yourself is the real meaning of compassion and love. And it's so ironic that compassion, which we think of as feeling sorry for someone, really is just something that is completely natural. It's this quality of warmth and clarity that pervades the field of the present moment. And he says, the records that count are those of the given moment, of now. Whether or not communication and openness are actually taking place now, because it's always now. That's the only time we ever have. And then I like this last thing. I think I'll close with this. Well, I love this. He says, in the Q&A, someone says, does this compassion require continual maintenance? And he says, I do not think so. It requires acknowledgement rather than maintenance. That is the mentality of wealth, that you acknowledge that it is there. And then finally this one. He says, a bodhisattva would not care even if she received a medal from all the Buddhas proclaiming her the bravest bodhisattva in the entire universe. She would not care at all. The bodhisattva's action is spontaneous. It is the open life, open communication, which does not involve struggle or speed at all. It is the open life. So that's the talk for tonight. It's quite romantic, don't you think? But it's really beautiful, heartening, that it's available to us all so readily. We have to we do the practice. We come back to this present moment. We can do it as we sit on the cushion. We can do it as we walk down the street, as we make our dinner, as we talk to a friend on the phone. We just do it all the time. Constantly coming back to that present moment and giving up that reference point of me being a big deal. When my first daughter was a child, I read her this poem by Maurice Sendak. Perhaps you've heard it. I'm really Rosie. I'm Rosie Real. I'm a great big deal. It was a great poem. So we could have a discussion if you want. Hold on, Peter, we're going to pass the mic, and if you could say your name, that would be great.
My name is Peter. So I'm bumping up against a fundamental problem.
Fundamental what?
Problem.
Problem, yes.
Problem, which is the absence of a teacher, which is particularly poignant due to the teacher that we had. That hole or gap, I think, will never be filled, I don't think. But even on a more, what can I say, pragmatic level, it's not that there aren't teachers, but they're kind of dispersed. And on this pragmatic or practical level, I find myself a little lost, frankly, because as you just finished saying, we need a teacher. We need teachers. Now, as I said, we have teachers, but they're kind of, evanescence. They come and go, and it's fine if you disagree with this, but because I'm not saying that I'm totally right, but as I said, I feel lost. I feel lost. Because geographically, one is in Washington, and another one is in India, and another one is in Mexico, and so on and so on. So it's tough, and maybe I'm just being a coward, or maybe I'm just being a complainer, but I do feel do feel a loss. You know? So I wonder if you have anything to say about that.
I do. Naturally. That's my job sitting here
not surprised.
in this chair. There's a lot to say. I mean, first of all, the teacher, so-called, is not just a particular human being. It's the principle of openness that can occur between the student and another person. You call it the teacher. And unless that magic happens, you could take the greatest Lama, and he or she is not going to be the teacher unless that magic happens between those two individuals. It's like falling in love. It's like, you fall in love with a person, a man or a woman, depending on whatever, and you fall in love. It's magical. There's no rhyme or reason. One person falls in love with one person, not with another. And it's the same thing, that teacher-student relationship is magic when it happens. It's the opening. It's deep friendship. Now, I once heard Khandro Rinpoche give an answer to this question. For those of you who don't know, Khandro Rinpoche is a Tibetan, one of the few female teachers abroad, and she's a terrific teacher. And she was giving a talk at the Shambhala Center years ago, and someone asked the same question, basically. And she said, there is no guarantee that you are going to find... we're talking about, there's a distinction. There are teachers and there are teachers, and there is the root teacher, right? There's a thing in the Tibetan tradition, they talk about root and branch teachers. Generally, a student will have one and maybe two and rarely three root teachers, but most commonly one. And that's the person with whom this magical open communication happens. And what she said is that you may not find a root teacher in this life. And of course that implies maybe you have to wait for the next life. And for those of you who aren't ready to take that step yet, we could talk. But so that's one answer to it. But another answer is this, that really what we do is that, you can't walk around saying, I don't have a teacher, I don't have a teacher, I don't have a teacher. That becomes another form of egotism, in this sense that ego is saying, if only I had a teacher, then in the future, I would get somewhere. And you're imagining this better place to be, which is the whole raison d'etre of ego. That's what ego does. Ego is this constant sense of sorrow for itself. The purpose of that sorrow, it only has one purpose. That sorrow of, oh, poor me, I don't have a teacher. Oh, poor me, I've lost all blah, 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 whatever, love, money, whatever it is. I've lost my youth, I've lost my health, and my future looks bleak. There's one purpose to all those stories which make us so miserable. Anybody got an idea? What is it? It's to prove that I am here suffering. I. That's the purpose of those stories. That's it. When you tell those stories about my sorrow, my loneliness, my lack of a teacher, my whatever it might be, my life is gone, passing, It's my, I, me, I. It's keeping that story alive about this fictional character, like Mickey Mouse, that only lives in those stories, in those complaints, in those sorrows. And every time we come present into the present moment and let them go, they cease. So the practice is to do whatever it takes to get yourself present. And it might mean that you're going to sit on the cushion, as much as you can. It might mean that you're going to study the Dharma. It might mean that you're going to hang out with people who support you in this endeavor. Those are the three jewels in Buddhism, right? The Buddha, the Dharma, in other words, the Buddha as an example, the Dharma, the teachings, and the Sangha, the community of fellow people who are treading the path and doing what you're doing. And when that magic happens, if it happens, of a connection with a powerful connection with some teacher, then it happens. And when it doesn't, you keep practicing. Because there's nothing else to do. Anything else is the path of insanity, the path of sorrow and craziness. And the path of coming back to this present moment and appreciating one's life with compassion and clarity and warmth, that's the path of sanity. And it's the only path we can take. I mean, you can go to a psychotherapist, and if they're not teaching you this, they're not giving you good psychotherapy. In fact, that came up in this talk towards the end, and he had some interesting comments about good and bad psychotherapy. Let me see if I've got him here. I don't know if I do. Or was it in the previous talk? Was it the open way? Sir? It was in the hard way. He says, one of the problems with therapy is we make it into a hobby. It becomes therapeutic, in quotes. And another problem is the idea of case history. Is a problem because it steers the individual away from reality of the present moment and towards some past or future solution. On the other hand, if psychotherapy emphasizes living in the present moment, experiencing the actuality of emotions and feelings, then I think that would be a very balanced style, he said. So, it's really the only, we have no choice. I mean, the choice is between being mired in confusion and suffering of egotism and coming present and giving our loyalty to this present moment and enjoying this life as it unfolds now and letting go of the idea of salvation. That's what the teacher demands too. So the teacher is a principle, and it can also be a human being, but it's also a principle that we can practice. Rochelle has a comment.
I think it's really important to remember that when we study with teachers, if we're lucky enough to find a teacher, that teacher is giving us, if it's a genuine teacher, giving us teachings and transmissions so that we can then continue the work and help other people. But if we're always constantly sucking off that teacher and expecting them to constantly give to us, we are not ever giving anything back or giving to other people, then we're depleting the teacher. And if our teacher happens to pass away, which is what Trungpa Rinpoche did, and Khyentse Rinpoche passed away, and the Karmapa passed, all the wonderful teachers that we met throughout the years, all of the students that studied with them were expected to then continue on the teachings that they received and work with other students that may not have met them. And if we don't do that, then we're really not understanding the reason why we receive these teachings, to continue on from one warm palm to the next warm palm, an oral transmission. So stop feeling sorry for ourselves for receiving great teachings from Trungpa Rinpoche and just start doing what he expected us to do, which is teach and work in the with the Dharma, the way he expected us to.
No.
I was just going to say that this is my current teacher. This happened here last week.
Mike is holding up his broken finger.
Yeah, well, it's not broken, thankfully, but it's fractured. It happened here last week. I slipped and I broke my fall and went to the ER, got an x-ray, and it's fractured. I'm going to see a specialist tomorrow, but it's interesting what's happened in the last week since this has occurred. And, I'm a guitarist. So this is my fretting finger. I recently started rock scrambling, so that requires both hands. I'm supposed to be training for a triathlon right now, and I can't swim. So it's like a little thing has like rocked my whole idea of who I am, and I'm living in this kind of hope and fear thing. Like, oh, maybe it's just gonna be nothing. Maybe it's just gonna be fine. I'll get all my full mobility back, even though it's slightly misaligned according to the X-ray. And then there's all these fears about like, am I gonna be able to play guitar the way I used to? Am I gonna be able to scramble rocks, etc.? So, I've been really trying to work with that and live in the present moment, because I don't know what's gonna happen at this point. And it's no good worrying about things that haven't happened yet. And even if it does mean that there's some change, then, like you said, what choice do I have if my life changes, except to work with it and make it be part of my path? And I don't know. I mean, I've had good days and bad days in terms of this, but it's actually struck me just now that this is kind of my teacher right now.
And what struck you? What?
This is my teacher right now, besides you.
Yeah, terrific. We're going to lose so much in the course of our lives. I mean, there's a great teacher, Patrul Rinpoche, who lived in the 1700s, Nyingma teacher, and he's a lot of people have difficulty with him. He wrote a great book called The Words of My Perfect Teacher, talking about his teacher. He was so modest. There are lots of stories about Patrul Rinpoche. He was a real character. I like the one that he always wandered around the plains of Tibet like a beggar. And he was known, he was a great teacher. And one day he's walking along and he meets this woman who's struggling along with a couple of kids, and he offers to help her get wherever she's going. And she's very grateful, and he shares his food with her and helps carry the children. And they're traveling, and they get to a monastery that he's heading towards. And when they get to the gate, she says to him, she doesn't know who he is. She sees this beggar, looking guy, and she says, "Would you consider marrying me?" And he says, "Well, I really can't do that." He says, "But let's go inside, and maybe I can help you." And they go into the monastery, and she's given accommodations and or something. And the next day, he's teaching, and she goes to the assembly, and she sees him sitting up there on the teacher's throne, and she's mortified, And when he finishes the teachings, as is traditional, they come up and they give him the teacher's gift, and he takes the gift and he walks down through the assembly and hands it to her and walks out the door and proceeds to wander back off across the Tibetan plateau. And that's his life is full of those stories. The Words of My Perfect Teacher is one of the great texts in the Tibetan canon, but a lot of people, when they read it, don't like it because it feels like Tibetan fundamentalism. It's full of fire and brimstone, and especially when he gets to describing the hells, which they're the hell realms and the god realms and all those. But one of the things he talks about how is everything's going to change, and if you're rich, you might be poor. And if you're beautiful, you're probably going to be ugly. And if you're loved, you'll be reviled. And if you're reviled, you'll be loved. And if you're poor, you'll be rich. And it'll go around and around and around. Of course, he's looking through the cycle of lives, but it can happen in this life too. And the question is, how can we learn to live this life in a way that is sane, fulfilling, awake, enlightened, and not be victim to the vicissitudes of life? I mean, breaking your finger, on the one hand, it can rock your world, especially if you're training for triathlons and doing all the rest of it. On the other hand, it's relatively small compared to what other people suffer in this life and what we could suffer any day, and what people have suffered. You know people who have suffered tremendous things, including people who have died. People who have lost their lives. I remember Trungpa Rinpoche giving a seminar on death, and the first thing one of the things he did, he looked out at us and he said, "You're all walking corpses." And what he meant by that was we all believe that we exist, like I'm an I. And when you believe in I, you're going to die.
Or you'll all be dropping like flies.
Yeah, he said about the future. He said, "You'll all be dropping like flies." You'll be dropping like flies. And I want to tell you, I'm here to, I was 25 when I met him. I'm 72 now. And I've got a lot of friends and lovers and people who are close to me who have died. Right, Peter? We know tons of them. And every week in the emails that I get news of somebody else because when you know a lot of people, you know a lot of people who are going to die as you get older. And he said, then he looked out at us and he said, "You think it's painful to lose your wealth, or to lose your prized possessions, or to lose loved ones, or to lose a limb, or to lose your health or your youth." He said, "When you die, you lose the whole world." So really what this is preparation. It's learning how to be here for this with loss. I mean, because it's going to happen to us, inevitably. And it is to everybody, to one degree or another. But this teaching of coming into the present moment, I mean, there are great teachers who, when they die, great accomplished, enlightened people, who die joyfully, who go into death with curiosity. I remember when Suzuki Roshi died. Suzuki Roshi was the master of Zen Center, Soto Zen. And he and Trungpa Rinpoche were terribly close. Terribly close. Rinpoche loved Roshi more than anybody else in this country, more than any other teacher. He respected Roshi. And yet they only spent a few hours together, I think. Oftentimes conversing, having conversations in front of their students. The students would all be sitting around and they'd be talking, Roshi in his pidgin Japanese English and Trungpa Rinpoche in his Oxonian Tibetan English, and you wondered how they understood each other. And Roshi contracted stomach cancer, which was very ironic in a way, because we knew that Roshi's favorite movie was a Japanese Kurosawa film called Ikiru, which is a beautiful film. I recommend it to you. It's about a man, a heartless bureaucrat in the Japan of the 1950s, who has lost his soul. I mean, he's not cruel or mean, he's just dead. And he sits on his desk stamping the papers of people who come before him without even looking at them. He's living this meaningless life until he discovers that he's dying of stomach cancer. And the movie is about what then happens in his life. And it's a gorgeous film. And then Roshi died of stomach cancer. But when he was dying, Trungpa Rinpoche went to visit him in the hospital. I mean, talk about loss, right? He's losing his life. And when he came back, people asked, there was a group of people sitting around, and someone asked Rinpoche, how was Roshi? And he said, "He's dying like a true Buddhist." And someone said, "What does that mean?" And Rinpoche said, "He's curious about his own death." I mean, we could be fearless. Coming into the present moment is true fearlessness. Fear is like everything else. It has one purpose: to prove that I am here. That that little I, is alive and well. It's I's job to be afraid. And every time you come present, it evaporates. Fear only lives in those thoughts about the past and the future. One. Maybe this will be the last, huh?
I think being a true Buddhist, we die before actually we die. Our identity dies, and before our body dies, we have such a strong identity to our body. When you say that, oh, I am nobody, nobody means that when my body die, I am, when I don't have the body, then I'm nobody. But actually, I think being a true Buddhist, you have to have no identity. So you have to die before your body dies.
Okay. So, I guess what comes out of this talk really is the encouragement to me, and I hope to you, to practice, to give our loyalty to this life that we have as it arises in the present with clarity and warmth and heart. I think that's another way of talking about compassion. Heart for what arises in the present moment, what we experience, and to support each other in this to the extent that we can and need it, and can give support to others, and to share our inspirations, and when necessary our doubts and our fears and our depressions too, so that others can help lift us up. That's the definition of the third jewel, Sangha. It's that Sangha is the community of practitioners. And what it means is that we come together, but we're not leaning or relying on each other. It's a group of practitioners or people treading the path who are walking alone together, so that if one person falls or needs help, the other person who's standing next to him or her can reach down and help them stand. So we can do that together too. So we should say the dedication of merit. Dedication of merit, I'll just explain, is what we're doing is we're giving away the merit that has accumulated from this talk and this participation, this meditation, to all other sentient beings on the planet. And in doing that, we're giving away our egotism, which we don't need anyhow. Thank you very much. And we're really opening ourselves into being here and present and helpful to everybody else. And really, we benefit too. We're sort of giving the benefit to ourselves. And they say in the tradition that no practice is complete without the dedication of merit at the end. So, by this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.